Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Hail Yes, the Detroit Free Press podcast about University of Michigan athletics. I'm Tony Garcia, Michigan football and basketball writer for the Free Press, joined sort of by the usual suspects. We have Reiner Saban here, of course, our Big Ten insider. And Reiner, we were joined by Andrew. We expect to be joined again by Andrew. But right as we were going to hit record, it sounded like a fire alarm of some sort in his building. So he's gone. He's not here.
Yeah, I mean, strange circumstances, bad circumstances, but, you know, we play on. It's what you do.
Next man up, exactly. It kind of feels like we're without our coach a little bit, maybe without our parent a little bit. I don't know, but we're all good and we're going to keep it rolling. And we do expect, I mean, we're kind of blind here and we have a tight recording window today. We got a new, now we can talk about it. We have a new sports editor at the Detroit Free Press, Bill Bradley. Very excited to have him. As we record this Wednesday afternoon tonight, we have sort of an introduction with him. We had press conferences earlier. So just sort of explaining why there's a tight window and why it's not like, why not just wait until Andrew's back? Well, it was kind of hard to even find this 1 hour window to get this in. And so quick preview. We are going to recap Michigan State. And of course, that always seems to start with some sort of shenanigans, as Ward Manuel called it to me. So we'll start there, then review the game, how it happened, take a break, preview, ho-hum, number one Oregon coming into town on Saturday, which leads off a very busy November. So unless there's anything else, Reiner, you have anything before we get going?
No, that sounds like a good summary of what the show's going to be about. So,
okay, excellent. So as always, we start at the end. In the aftermath of Michigan's 24-17 victory over Michigan State, which we should not gloss over, many people, all of us on this show, picked Michigan State to win. So, I mean, big win, big momentum win for Michigan. How long that will continue remains to be seen. But for the time being, it was going to be big positive vibes. But then just sort of a kerfuffle after the final snap. Anthony Jones, the defensive end for Michigan State, plays through that final whistle, which kind of is understood you're not supposed to do when you're just taking a knee and the ball game's over. Colston Loveland took exception to that. But instead of just, hey, we just won and kind of waving him off, he headbutts him a little bit, right? Goes helmet to helmet. Then Jones grabs him, kind of rips him down. And then the phrase I've been using is a mini melee sort of ensued after that. Very hard to tell. Not a ton of angles of what was going on. And in the end, Reiner, it looks like the Big Ten will not the Big Ten will not be further punishing anybody.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, it was just kind of a stupid situation, honestly. And it's just another annoying element that just surfaced in this series. I mean, it's the most toxic rivalry in college football. And I've experienced Alabama-Auburn, which probably people think of as pretty toxic. I mean, obviously with the poisoning of the tumor, and the just in general back and forth between.
Is his name Harvey Updike? Is that his name?
Yeah, the Harvey Updike. Yeah, back in Tumors Corner Oaks, and it's just like, it was that's a bitter rivalry, but there's more stability between the two schools. I think this one is just completely nasty, and there's people that fan the flames on both sides, including obviously the fans mostly, but it spills over into the field with the players. And we were just hoping to get through 1 year without something. And sure enough, we couldn't do that. It was, frankly, pretty frustrating, I think, for people who are just kind of third party spectators here and just kind of observing. I mean, I find it frustrating as a journalist just to have to, deal with this. And because I don't think there's any, guilty party, innocent party in this whole situation. Everybody's kind of in the same boat, honestly.
This is my third year covering this rivalry, Reiner. Every single time I've either spoken to law enforcement or Big Ten officials or contacted them because of something that's happened this week. Every time. And you're right. It's totally frustrating. Nobody wins. Nothing good comes of this. I guess we can get into it a little bit, right? I mean,
and also people see what they want to see. And that's the thing. It's the ultimate Rorschach test. I mean, it's just like it's an ink blot picture and everybody sees what they want to see based on their personal biases. And it's so aggravating to have to deal with it on a year-to-year basis. And again, I thought because Jonathan Smith was coming in, he's a pretty mild-mannered guy for the West Coast, really gave off vibes that he wasn't going to lean into the whole rivalry aspect. I thought there was going to be a cool down factor. The fact that Jim Harbaugh left, who was an agitator, an instigator, called things Bush League, really, pushed for punishment following the tunnel incident, was really lobbying for that on multiple levels. He was gone. I really thought that this was going to be a new chapter. And again, we're right back in the same situation in a lot of ways.
I would argue it had the potential for the new chapter, and I don't think your read on the room was wrong. If anything, I think your assessment of Jonathan Smith, calm, cool West Coast guy, was totally right. And look at what he said after the game. He did not go into that game anywhere near as prepared as any Michigan State coach needs to be in order to win that game. And Mel Tucker's name has always been used as like an indictment, right, in East Lansing circles. He had been a staffer in East Lansing before this. He knew what that game meant. And even with terrible team, in 2020, he won. In 2021, he won. He had a winning record against Michigan. Mel Tucker, right? And to come in, so in some sense, he was just kind of kumbaya West Coast guy. Oh, we got an Oregon State rivalry. I've heard, I know that they play for some Paul Bunyan guy too. Well, and so maybe they could have, but now, but it also goes to show, players going to be players, right? If you're going to use Colston Loveland's phrase, he said, little bro gunning little bro. But I think it's college athletes in the heat of fire are going to, it's not excusing anything, but it's going to say, even if you had, and this was a pretty clean game. Michigan was not flagged. Michigan State, only 6 flags. And very few after the play, right? No extracurriculars, not a lot of shoving. It was pretty clean. And so there was reason to think that maybe you could get out of it. But sure enough, right at the end, there you go. And I guess we need to address it here. Kalel Mullings, there were headlines circulating around him and questions. And I'll admit, I asked a question about Sharon Moore, just clarifying what a video showed or didn't show or might have shown, or did it show it, right? It's one quick 15-second video from a Big Ten network camera kind of swinging overhead. And so I asked Sharon Moore about it. It kind of looks like Kalel's making a kicking motion. Do you know anything? What's going on there? And it seems, now we need to be clear. The Big Ten said, essentially, the review was inconclusive, right? So that does not mean that he did do it or that he did not do it. It just means there's not enough evidence for anybody to say what did or did not happen. And with Michigan State, with Alan Haller, the athletic director, saying he did not want to pursue criminal charges or anything. I feel like it might be one of those things that hopefully it can just kind of end here.
Well, they also didn't identify the staffer and supposedly the player.
It felt poorly handled on MSU's part. Do you agree?
Yeah. I didn't quite understand the lack of clarity there. And then they also, in the Big Ten statement, they said that they spoke to both schools. So I don't know what that entailed. But they said they spoke to both schools. And then Haller said that they basically would accept the decision, and that was it. Essentially. And so, yeah, I just think a lot of people took, again, took a ride on the jump to conclusions, Matt, referring to the Office Space situation. But yeah, they did. They went on the jump to conclusions match and didn't wait for it to and that includes journalists too. And I think that's really, disappointing in a lot of ways.
Man, I kind of wanted to sidestep this whole thing. I don't want to get into it. We've done enough of it. I agree largely. I've seen people calling for people to apologize to Kalel Mullings. I think that's overblown too. Nobody said that he needs to be kicked off the team. Maybe, if you're talking about those things, I don't know. That's not, I'm not here to espouse an opinion on that, but I'm just going to say from my vantage, from my question, I just wanted to ask a question, right? What may or may not have happened. Maybe they saw other angles, but you're right. To be guilty in the court of public opinion is not fair before the proceedings have played out. And as we've talked about, Reiner, Kalel Mullings, he's about, we've talked to dozens of members on this team. I'd say for my money, for my whatever, as much as you could read a dude, judge a dude, he might be the best egg of the bunch, right? Kalel Mullings is by all accounts, and not just accounts, by all interactions I've had with him, a really good dude.
Yeah, I agree.
Very responsible, respectful. I mean, the last guy frankly, that you would expect to be involved in something like this. Do you think that's fair?
I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, just based on what I've seen, I mean, just how he handles things with the media, he seems very accountable and, says what's on his mind, doesn't try to spin anything. He's pretty matter of fact. And he's always handled things as, again, seems like what the college experience is supposed to do for these student athletes, which he also seems to value the school portion too, which is nice to see in this day and age. Yeah. I mean, it is, a lot of people think that these guys are just in it for, again, NIL money, but I mean, this is a guy who got to University of Michigan before L was even a thing. So yeah, Kalel Boyens is like what the college experience is supposed to be about for these guys. I mean, they're supposed to kind of evolve. I mean, he evolved from a linebacker to a running back and, has made some sacrifices on his end as a teammate. And so, I mean, again, I'm not going to judge this either way because I didn't see what happened. Again, all we had was this overhead image and you can, again, jump to conclusions, but that's the wrong thing to do. And so everybody needed to kind of step back and wait a little bit before any more information came out. And unfortunately, a lot of people didn't do that and they just made some rash judgments. And, again, who knows if they're correct? Who knows if they're wrong? But it's wrong to just jump in and make, a solid judgment off of very, very suspect footage that you just have no idea what the actual circumstances were, what even prompted it, really, honestly, and what was going on. Again, we didn't get any information that substantiated anything really there. And according to the Big Ten, they didn't get any either because they said they had inconclusive evidence.
And frankly, we've now just spent the first 15 minutes back on this topic, right? Without even discussing the game, without talking about a huge rivalry win, without talking about number 1 Oregon, right?
Sure.
Because it's just how this goes. So that's enough of this. We all know that's where that is. Enough. Moving on. Because Reiner, they did win the game, right? And in a lot of ways, I guess you could say, I mean, it reminds me, not in the same way, but in some ways fortunate to win the game, right? They were outrushed. And just that alone.
Well, outrushed and outpassed.
Outrushed, outpassed, outgained, outpossessed. And the winner of the rushing battle, 48-6 in the previous 54 matches going in. So if you look at that, and it was by a wide margin. I think Michigan, we talked about it. On the last podcast, it felt like Michigan had a pretty narrow path to victory. And I think they towed that line as well as they have all year long. Now, I think you wrote a great column. It doesn't necessarily inspire confidence that it's going to be perfectly repeatable, that they're always going to have no turnovers, that they're always going to have no penalties, that they're always going to have no sacks allowed. That seems a bit far-fetched. But for this one day, they did. And just if I may, while I'm on it, when I say everything just about worked to how they had to have it, we've been hard on this receiving room, right? They didn't wow. It was like 6 grabs for 67 yards, but everyone mattered. Samaj Morgan converted 2 third downs by 1 yard. Kendrick Bell had 1 catch that went for a third down. Tyler Morris had 1 catch that was a 23-yard flea flicker. Peyton O'Leary had his first catch in a month and a half, like the 4th in all year. And he even kind of made someone miss, right? Turned a 9-yard gain into, I think it was, I hit the mic, into maybe 15 yards or so. Just lots of little things. And then, of course, we talked the flea flicker. We talked the double pass from Donovan, even a direct snap to Samaj. We joke about the phrase getting the heat off the sheet, but there were some better play calls. And it was, they were fortunate that Michigan State missed an early kick, right? Just so many things. It's like, and they won the turnover battle that they weren't fortunate to do. Josiah Stewart just comes back and rips him. I know that's a lot of thoughts. We'll get to you now, Reiner, but it's just, I wanted to map that out because it just felt like that's how they won it, right? How do you win a game when the box score looks one way? It's because everybody did just enough, right? And just about everybody did it.
Just enough. But you also need help from a careless opponent, and Michigan State is that opponent. They have been terrible, terrible in the red zone all year long. I mean, I've obviously covered this team as well, and I've seen it firsthand. I mean, they blow chance after chance in the red zone. And that first drive, that missed field goal was a huge, huge game changer for Michigan, because if they score 7 points, maybe just 3, they go up 2 scores after the second drive, assuming that the second drive plays out exactly the same way. And it was a huge missed opportunity by them, and they shot themselves in the foot. Michigan didn't do anything really. I mean, other than, I guess, again, getting them to the 4th down situation where they had to decide whether to kick the field goal or not. But then Michigan State commits a delay of game penalty and then shanks a 25-yarder with a guy who just set a school record with 6 made field goals against Iowa. So, I mean, talk about lucky. I mean, that is extremely lucky. And yet, here was Sharon Moore on Monday saying, they held him to no points, and we'll take that any day. But it's not just about the result. It's the process that got there. They took 8 minutes off the clock, and they drove it right down Michigan's throat. And I just, again, I don't think that that's a recipe for success going forward. And if they were truthful with themselves, they would admit that as such too. And I think that's alarming to me early on in the tenure, that Sharon Moore really seems very much a results-oriented guy, not about process. Because look at how impatient he was with the quarterbacks. I mean, it was just all about, he threw 3 interceptions. Well, Jonathan Smith had seen, Aiden Childs do the exact same thing. He's seen him throw 3 interceptions. He's seen him repeatedly make bonehead mistake after bonehead mistake. And yet he stayed with them because he sees the long-term benefit of doing so. And I think if they stayed with Davis Warren maybe a little bit longer than they did, maybe they wouldn't be in this situation.
I'm of that mindset, and that's why we named our episode, our first Hell Yes episode afterwards, Panic or Pragmatic. That switch, because we felt it was premature, right? And so, and then I just want to talk, more about just sort of the tenor that came out after that game. I probably shouldn't be surprised, but I almost was, because here was Colston Loveland a week ago, like 1 week earlier, talking about how, now all the goals are over. The main crux of the season is over. They're now here to play spoiler. They're now here to wreck people's seasons. And they were on the verge of going 0 for October. And now you needed 4th and 5 on inside your own 20 against a Michigan State team that we've just detailed is exceptionally mediocre, like super average to maybe worse than that in lots of ways. Decent talent, but it's just an average football team. There's no other way around it. And then you beat them in a pretty close game that you were largely, or at least somewhat, like 50-50 outplayed in, you could say. Nobody could say anything other than that. And then now you're going to have this false bravado. It was just a weird tenor about, like, when we were asking, and you asked a lot of good questions about, are you the hunter or the hunted, right? And they're just talking about, well, they got to play us, right? Like now, with number 1 Oregon coming into town, what's it like being on the other side of that? And just, it feels like they had forgotten that they hadn't won a game in 4 weeks, right? Like they had, and again, there's nothing that's proven that this can continue, because, we talk about this average Michigan State team. They have 1 sack in 5 Big Ten games. Davis Warren was under pressure on 3 snaps. And so he faced no pressure. He still only threw for 123 yards, and the running game was entirely bottled up. I'm not like that. It was, they won and they can be happy. Like, that's what I wrote afterwards. Like, they can be happy for one night. Like, there's nothing wrong with being happy about beating your rivalry. That's what college sports is about. But beyond that, I didn't see. The quarterback's a little better. But I
did not like the tone at all coming out. There was no humility. There was no understanding of, like, hey, it was a good win, but we had a lot of things that happened in that game that could be better, or we were fortunate in some ways to win this game. And no recognition of, like, the fact that there are bigger issues at stake here with this program. As you mentioned, that a lot of things have been temporary and maybe not sustainable with this specific game itself, with, again, no penalties, no sacks, no turnovers, when you haven't shown any evidence that you can do that game in and game out. especially considering that they committed a turnover, at least one turnover, sack, and interception in every of the other 7 games. And it was like, then they were saying, that if we play our best game, we could beat anybody. And I just, so you no matter how Oregon plays, if Oregon plays their best game, can Michigan beat them? I don't think so. I don't think so at all.
No, I know. We know so. We know so.
And it's like, why would you say that? And like, why do you have to say that? Like, why can't you just say, look, they're a great team. We've got to play our best game to be able to, hang with them or
to be in it in the fourth.
Yeah. Get it in the fourth, or just say just pay the ultimate respect to them and be done with it. But to suggest that and this is what they quote unquote said, we're still Michigan. We're Michigan. That doesn't mean anything in the context of this season.
And how Dan Lanning feels about these sort of things, right? Like, we've seen him last year against Colorado. Run it up, try to run it up after halftime. Like, we're not done. Like, they think they want to go win on. And I'm not saying Michigan at all is an Instagram program, but they're a big name program. Dan Lanning likes his spots. National TV. If he still thinks his team's being undersold for some reason, even if they're number one, he'll get them to rally. And against the defending national champion, when they look somewhat vulnerable, that definitely appears to be a spot.
And Quentin Johnson saying, we don't look at them as the number one team in the nation. We look at them as Oregon. Well, Oregon is the number one team in the nation, and they're really good. On both sides of the ball. Again, they're a complete team, and we'll get into it after the break. But the rhetoric coming out of the program was disappointing. Again, it just seems reflective of a coach that is a prisoner of the moment. Sharon Moore is a prisoner of the moment. Unfortunately, he's got to get more perspective on things and be able to kind of use that to fuel his team so that they can better able to produce long-term results.
That is the name of the game, and they will see if they can start getting those results against number one Oregon. We will break that down on the other side of the break, and I think we may have Andrew Burkle back by then. Don't go anywhere. This is Hell Yes. All right, welcome back. Of course, time to preview the game. Number one, Oregon versus unranked Michigan. Oregon 8-0 overall, 5-0 in the Big Ten, their first year in the Big Ten. They even beat Ohio State 32-31 in Eugene. Game they could have lost, but a game they did win. Oh, welcome back, Andrew.
Oh, I made it, fellas. Can you hear me?
We can. Is there no fires, we hope?
Well, as far as I know, I got down to the lobby and there's a bunch of glass on the floor. Not sure if it's related, but hey, here we are. So we made it back in. I even got a Starbucks on my way back in while I was waiting to come back in the building. So I'm here to make some picks and try to get the ship back on the rails here because it's been a little ugly. I'm sure you guys talked about it already.
Yeah, we're not quite there yet. We're just starting to break down Michigan, Oregon. In case everyone can't tell, this is live. He literally just came back in the studio. So
I literally just did. Yeah, cool. Plenty of time.
Yeah. So I'm going to toss it to Reiner here, just about what we're talking about, Reiner. Big test.
Yeah. No, this team is a complete team. Always looks like what Michigan did last year. They're just really solid on both sides. Got a strong offensive line, really strong defensive front. They were in the backfield at the game I saw in person against Michigan State. Michigan State's running game had no chance against them. And Aiden Childs was running for his life in that game. And if Michigan has the same issues, it's going to be lights out for that offense, given how limited they are. So, it's again, it's going to be a huge test at the line of scrimmage, which is what Dan Lanning has done since he got there. He brought that Georgia mentality to Oregon, and they play a lot like an SEC Big Ten team. This is not your Pac-12 school. They'll maul you and on both sides, and they're really good. I'm just saying. And I think they've got it better. That's the thing. They've gotten progressively better over the course of the season. Dylan Gabriel's hitting his stride. They've got a lot of weapons on the outside. Tez Johnson being the biggest one, but the
Evan Stewart as well.
Evan Stewart. Yeah. Another transfer from Texas A&M, SEC guy. Again, it's like they've got imports from all over the country. They got Derek Harmon from Michigan State on the defensive line. they've done a good job with the transfer portal and roster building. And this looks like a national championship level team. I mean, they're number one. I mean, but they really do look like a national championship caliber team.
And so just some of those comparisons that Reiner made. So Oregon this year averaging 35 points per game, 25th in the nation. Last year, Michigan 35.9, which is 14th. And on defense, Oregon's allowing just more than 15 per game. Michigan was just more than 10 per game. Just so dominant last year. So Oregon's 10th this year, Michigan's first last year. But Michigan was top 10 in both, Oregon's top 25 in both. The point is Oregon very sound. And Reiner, I want to ask you about just sort of the run game in the trenches and a little bit of transitive property with Oregon, right? Because you talk about Michigan State not being able to move the ball at all, right, on the ground against Oregon. Well, we saw them just kind of rip through Michigan on the ground. I mean, they had a lot of big runs. Nate Carter did it just by himself,
sure,
right? And then you look on the other side of the ball. I mean, just even looking back at that box score and then some of the highlights. I mean, Jordan James was ripping through Michigan State, right? I mean, he had nearly 150 yards. I mean, gash after gash after gash. Then you look at what Michigan just did against Michigan State. Their running backs were held to 42 yards or something. I mean, it was by far the worst rushing game for the backfield. So now I wonder, how can Michigan, I mean, you just transitive property it out, right? I mean, if how Michigan State looks against Oregon, how Oregon look, right? And then how they look against each other, how Michigan will look. And then when you add to it, 2 weeks ago, Michigan loses to Illinois 21-7. And granted, they have to go to Oregon, but Oregon then blows Illinois out 38-9. So I mean, once you just start adding it up, I could see a recipe for some problems in the run game for Michigan.
Yes, I agree. And Jordan James was outstanding, like you mentioned, that was outstanding at Michigan State. I mean, physical runner. I mean, he was bowling guys over and just breaking tackles, and he's a fun runner to watch. He is a fun runner to watch. He is a fun runner to watch, and I was really impressed. And Noah Whittington is also a good back, complimentary back, but Jordan James is something to watch, and I really was impressed by him. And they were again getting to the second level repeatedly. I mean, big runs. I can't remember. They had 8, I think, runs of 10 or more yards, I think, in that game. And so it was steady. I mean, they kept coming at Michigan State, and like the flip side, again, that defensive line was getting into the backfield and hitting those backs right after the handoff. And they were also, again, harassing Aiden Childs all the time. Now, Michigan State's offensive line, I think overall is weaker than Michigan's, but I don't think it's that big of a gap between the two. And I think we saw that against Michigan State. Again, Michigan's offensive line, not the same. And I think, was taken for granted going into the season that, it's Michigan, they'll have a great offensive line. Well, and that's not necessarily the case. I mean, it hasn't been this year. And I think they've made some wrong personnel moves throughout the season, which is what they've had to fix on the fly. You've seen that at right tackle and specifically center. Miles Hinton being back was a huge boost for this offensive line, but overall, just not a great offensive line. And I think it could have trouble against Oregon.
I just want to not get too much on a soapbox, but 45 seconds. I'd be pretty concerned. I mean, just even you saying that about the offensive line personnel decisions, how many questionable personnel decisions have there been on one team, right? Center, right tackle, quarterback, go to running back. Donovan Edwards was the lead ball carrier until it was like, okay, well, can we flip this? Like, let's look at the efficiency, right? And then now it's exactly what it obviously should have been. Kalel's the bell cow, and now you're using Donovan in Donovan ways, and you're maximizing him. All of those were in the wrong position beforehand, which brings me to just sort of a point I wanted to make in the first half when we're talking about the tone and the tenor of things. Frequently, we have heard this is not what it looks like in practice. We got to bring it from state to Maine. We're not making these turnovers in practice. The offensive line's opening more holes in practice. The receivers are separating better in practice. That is now, consider my ears deaf ears. That is falling completely on deaf ears because there's nobody to hold them accountable. There's absolutely no proof or iota of evidence about what anything looks like in practice. How would we possibly know when you won't show us 1 second and we're supposed to just take you at your word when pretty much everything you've said has then, like, as it's evolved, like, I mean, just think about, I mean, they were boosting Amarion Walker for years. He's had like 1 catch. I mean, who else? I mean, you name it, and it's It's just disingenuous. It's totally disingenuous. And so if I'm a fan, I'm really concerned about the choices that are being made, about personnel, about these assumptions that are being made that you could just take it over to Main Street. Because newsflash, four first round picks are leaving in a couple months, gone, and they're not coming back. And I mean, who's going to replace? I don't know. It's just.
Well, I mean, and also, I mean, again, Sharon Moore, I mean, unfortunately hasn't proven to be a reliable narrator because, again, every time a quarterback is made, he's the guy. You know, we're you know, this is the guy. You know, we're turning to him. He's going to be the guy, and then he's not the guy. And then, you know, he said the offensive line before in August 13th, his lone press conference during the preseason said, offensive line, we're always going to be good there. Well, they haven't been good there at different points throughout the season. So, I mean, again, it's hard to take anything that is said and believe that that's going to be the case, you know, long term. I mean, maybe they're just saying it because they just want to invite confidence and keep the positivity up. But also, I mean, I think honesty does go a long way, and calling a spade is important, especially when things aren't going well.
And part of what brings us up, and then we're about to bring Andrew in and make the picks, is today, Wednesday, October 30th, we spoke with JB Brown, special teams coordinator. And he was asked the first question about Tommy Doman, what's going on, He gave, I think, almost verbatim. I might need to go back a month ago and I'm going to copy and paste the two answers. It was the exact same thing. You know, things are going well in practice, not translating to the game. We got to work some things up, work on the timing, but it's going to be all good. What does that mean? How can you possibly say that after Tommy Doman was an All Big Ten honorable mention punter last year, and he has objectively been perhaps the worst punter in the Big Ten? I mean, Michigan is fortunate that 24-yard straight shank in the fourth quarter didn't burn him. You know what I mean? It's just, I mean, he didn't have a 50-yard punt. Sure, 3 times he pinned MSU inside its 20, but he was punting from midfield. Like those were 30-yard punts. He dropped the hole.
But the holding issues you've had. I mean, you had the fake punt that was allowed in Illinois. That was very critical play. You had the field again.
And I asked him about big plays in the return game, like how much that could. I mean, think about how much this offense could use that boost, right?
Sure.
And he goes, I cited the Lions game. I mean, the Lions just had 250 some yards of returning and just the juice that brought. And the response was, well, Samaj had a 114-yard return. 114. That's one first down, one time. What are you talking about?
Right.
What does that have to do with anything? I mean, it's just, it is
baffling.
It's getting a little worked up, but it's just really frustrating when you can't get a straight answer out of anything, and you don't get to know what happens in practice, and then things don't look good in the game, and they say, well, it looks better in practice. How can we believe that?
Well, again, that line, what you just said, was very, very common during the 2020 season. And I know you were covering the team then, but it was a shockingly similar line. It was the players mentioned it right after the Indiana game, the loss there it was like the first loss since 1987 to Indiana. They said that exact same line that, you know, we're doing it in practice, but for some reason it's not translating to. Josh Gaddis, you know, also like referenced during that season how they weren't practicing as well or something like that. And so, I mean, there was more criticism internally about maybe how they were practicing. I don't know if that's necessarily the tone of what we're hearing. We're just hearing that the practice is going well, but it's not showing up on Main Street. Now, but that exact line, not being able to transfer it from state to Maine, was a very common thing you heard during the 2020 season, which obviously was the worst year under Harbaugh.
All right, time to bring Andrew in. I think he's still here, and make some picks. Probably starting with Michigan, Oregon, but we'll leave that up to Andrew.
Totally new strategy this week, and I need it. Do you want to go over the records, Tony? I'm sure you always give me a hard time when I don't, so I should go over them, right?
Yeah, you do what you feel is right.
Tony went 2-2, so he's still in first place at 19-13. I went 1-3, but the one I got right, I was very right about. I will say that. I called the Notre Dame game completely, and they just destroyed Navy. But I was dead wrong on all the other ones. So at least when I'm right, I'm right. And when I'm wrong. So, and Reiner went 1-3 as well. So he is currently 17-15 for the season. I said new strategy because, guys, you guys filled out the picks. I don't even know what games we're picking until right now. So I'm going to go pure gut instinct. I watch enough football. I should be able to do this. But let's start things off with Michigan versus Oregon. The Ducks are 15-point favorites at the Big House. Reiner, what do you think of that spread? Do you think it's too high, too low? And who do you think is going to win the game?
I think it's pretty dead on, honestly. I mean, that's kind of what you would think for a number one team that's playing a 5-3 team on the road. I mean, you have to kind of take the names off and just look at it objectively. I mean, yeah, it's Michigan, but it's not Michigan of last year. And so that's how you get a 15-point spread. I mean, the offense has been pretty rough. And I don't think, the odds makers probably looked at the game last week and thought, oh, well, Michigan's back, because they beat Michigan State by 7 points, in which they, as Tony had mentioned, they had to make a stop on 4th down in the end zone inside the red zone to preserve that. And they also have to recognize that, again, Michigan State shot itself in the foot repeatedly in that game. So, yeah, I think it's a fair line. And, I'm going with Oregon to beat it, and cover, in that sense. Because, again, as we talked about, I think they're a very complete team. I think they've got strengths where Michigan has weaknesses. And I think they can really exploit Michigan's weaknesses, unlike any other opponent that Michigan's faced.
Oregon +3 in turnover margin, Michigan -6 or -7. We just talked about the quick passing game of Dylan Gabriel, I think really could neutralize Michigan's greatest strength, right? Which is its defensive line getting after the quarterback. And if he can just dink and dunk it and get it out on screen passes and swing routes, and not that he can't push it downfield.
That's the thing. He does throw a great deep ball. He throws a great deep ball. He does. But we saw what Quinn Ewers did, right? Just not even let anyone get near him. Just get rid of it. And it just frustrated Michigan to beyond who knows what. And so I think, and then when you combine, Michigan has not stopped the run well lately. Oregon runs the ball well. And I was just not moved. Davis Warren was solid. I'm not convinced that he is going to just be mistake-free again when there's pressure on him. I'm not convinced that Alex Orji is going to just run 6 times for 64 yards because that's the first time that's happened this year. This is a really good Oregon team coming in. Really good. And I think they handle it. So I'm with the Ducks.
That makes three of us here. Do you guys remember?
That should be music to Michigan fans' ears, because last week we all picked Michigan State. So good news, Michigan.
I swear, like I said, we did not talk about this obviously before because of what I said. But do you guys remember what the Michigan State-Ohio State spread was when the Spartans hosted Ohio State? Just off your top of your heads, do you guys remember?
24?
I just looked it up. 23.5.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
24 points. If based on...
That was a guess. That was pretty good.
We know that Oregon beat Ohio State, and Michigan and Michigan State are basically even. So I feel like that a lot of this line is kind of a bit of an overreaction to last week, maybe a bit of it. Hey, it's Michigan. They're at home. They're at the Big House. I just think that I thought the line would be closer to 17.5, which is why I opened with that question to you, Runner. I think you're getting a couple extra points here because if this thing slips away from Michigan, they're going to be playing catch up. Davis Warren, slinging it around and taking some chances. You could have a pick six, go the other way real quick and totally flip the spread on its head. So I'm going with Oregon. And I honestly feel pretty good about what the points are too. So again, more music to Michigan fans' ears here for the panel all across the board. Just like last week on the paper. Did you guys see that in front of the Detroit Free Press sports section? Michigan State, Michigan State, Michigan State, Michigan State, Michigan State, and Michigan wins. So good news for the Wolverines.
Oh, as soon as I saw all of us pick it, you just knew. But that's the thing. We don't, it's not like we all talk to each other and or at least I don't, but we don't talk about the picks. But if you watch the teams going in, it was just hard.
Well, but even if you watch the game, there was ample chance for Michigan State to actually win that game. They really did. They lost. They controlled the 14-minute time of possession. Anytime you do that, and like you alluded to, anytime you outrush the opponent in that game, you usually win. It's like a 85% chance.
And they converted more than half of their third downs. It's astonishing. Not a lot of losses look like that.
It's one of those where right pick, wrong result, kind of how you feel. You know what I mean? Like if you go in the NFL playoffs and you pick against the Chiefs and they happen to get lucky or are unlucky and lose, you don't feel like you made the wrong pick. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's kind of where some of the people probably feel about this Michigan game. But all right, let's move on to our second game, the biggest game of the weekend, one of the biggest games of the season, Penn State versus Ohio State. The Buckeyes are a 3.5-point favorite. Mr. Garcia, does James Franklin get over the hump?
Oh, man. So I'm so torn here because Ohio State is pretty soft. I feel more confident saying that after how they just looked against Nebraska. They're just not, it's like, come on. Like, what are you doing? Like, Michigan fans are kind of right in all their chirping about Ohio State. I mean, there is a lot of softness, a lot of Charmin around that program. That said, if you are asking me to back James Franklin in an important game, I'd rather cut off my arm and eat it. There's just no chance I'm going to do that. And then when you add to it, Will Howard from Downingtown, Pennsylvania, Maxwell Football Player of the Year as a senior in the state of Pennsylvania, always wanted to go to Penn State. They never offered him a scholarship, and he talked about it this week. He said I actually got real vibes off of this. He was like, I'm so pumped. He's like, I always wanted to play at Penn State. They didn't think I was good enough. Saturday, we're going to see if I was. Oh, give me that. I want all of that. I don't know if I'll live up to it, but I like that moxie. And so I'm absolutely riding with Ohio State.
Yes, I am too. I'm riding with Ohio State. And the reason why is because of actually the Nebraska game. I think it was a wake-up call for Ohio State. I think it was probably good for them that they had to sweat it out for that game. They're gonna go into this with a lot of things, or the mentality of like, we need to fix some things, get some things right, particularly probably with that offensive line. And, I expect the execution to be a lot better across the board for them. Again, I've been impressed with Penn State and what the new offensive coordinator's been able to do with Drew Aller. They're throwing the ball downfield more. There's no more dink and dunking there. They're stretching the field. The Tyler Warren tight end has really come on, a bit of key factor, and they still have Katron Allen and Nick Singleton in the backfield. So they got a good offense, but I don't know if that offense is good enough to beat Jim Knowles' defense. So overall, I mean, I'm going to go with Ohio State again. You also mentioned the James Franklin big game failures that he typically does. And, you'll see it probably in some stupid fourth down decision that he makes, or terrible clock management. Yeah, there. So unfortunately, that's his track record. And so I don't have any confidence necessarily. And the fact is, Ryan Day at times gets his team up to really play these big games, and they come through in the clutch like they did against Notre Dame last year in South Bend.
So a couple of years ago, I was driving through Grand Rapids, and we saw Bagger Dave's. We saw a Bagger Dave's. Remember that place? And my friend goes, I was like, oh, Bagger Dave's, they closed down? What's going on? He goes, that's what they do. They close down. This is James Franklin. This is what he does. He loses games, big games when they matter. And so I think you guys said it. It's hard to go over top what Tony said when he said he'd rather bite off his own arm, but I'm not picking Ohio State. I'm not going to. So quit asking. I'm not going to pick Penn State over Ohio State. And let's just move on, because I think you guys said everything needs to be said. I mean, this is what Penn State does until they do prove otherwise. So, all right, Michigan State and Indiana. The Hoosiers continue to prove me wrong, and I try to bet against them, but they keep coming through. So, Reiner, is this the week it finally catches up to them against Michigan State, 7-point favorites?
Yeah, I think Michigan State, I don't know if they win the game, but I think it's going to be closer than that. So I'm getting Michigan State to cover here. And the reason why is the time of possession. I mean, they have dominated the time of possession the last two games with Iowa and Michigan. And while they lost the game to Michigan, I think that's the recipe that you need to beat Indiana. Keep that offense off the field. And if they're able to do that, get that run game going again, and Aiden Childs doesn't commit a turnover, which, you kind of hope that at some point, he doesn't make that critical mistake. If you're a Michigan State fan, I think they have enough there to be able to keep this game very close. There's possibly a chance to win it too. I mean, but I'm not necessarily picking them to win it though. So I've reserved judgment on that until later in the week.
Man, Ryder and I are on very similar caps here. Indiana has trailed for as many seconds this year as I have been king of the world. And that's 0. They have never trailed for 1 second at any point in any game all year. Now, their strength of schedule, frankly, has not been impressive. I think it actually still ranks outside the top 100, which is pretty shocking. Who's the best Big Ten team they've seen? UCLA, Maryland, Northwestern, Nebraska, and Washington. I would say each one of those teams are middle of the pack or below. And a lot of them, and the toughest two, Nebraska and Washington, they got a home. Now you have to go on the road to MSU, possibly without Rourke, the quarterback. Taven Jackson looked pretty good last week, but it's still, Rourke was probably still the guy they wanted. And sneaky letdown spot off a game day. They had game day,
yes,
right?
They're
off game day. Got to go up to East Lansing before you host Michigan. It's kind of a letdown spot, right? Michigan's a big game for Indiana. They're going back home the following week. They just had game day. They're 8-0. They're top 10. They're everybody. Again, I'm not going to say Michigan State's going to win, but because this isn't 6.5, you're giving me the full touchdown. MSU has, since the bye week, they obviously just played Michigan very close and they beat Iowa at home. They're not great, but they're okay. And for a team, who knows? Maybe they fall behind early. They haven't responded to that. I think it is the last. And I didn't doubt Indiana last week. If you remember, I went back on. I originally was going to pick Washington, and then I went back and picked Indiana. So I do like what Indiana is doing, but I'm kind of with Ryder. I just think it's a sneaky spot, and you like to pick your spot. So MSU.
I'm switching my pick. I had Indiana. I can't trust them. I can't do it. I'm switching it again. You guys made a compelling case, and throughout this week, I thought I was picking Michigan State, and I was like, I can't keep picking against Indiana. But the Spartans match up pretty well against Indiana, what they want to do, especially if this ball control style offense that they've showed against two pretty good run defenses the last 2 weeks in Michigan and Iowa. If that's real, I think Michigan State not only has a chance to cover this 7 points, but I think they can win the game. The Spartans probably have some things they can take away from last week. I don't know. Maybe one idea would be to get Nick Marsh the ball a little bit more, because when they did that one time, he looked like Calvin Johnson all of a sudden and broke through that tackle and sprinted towards the end zone. So there's some things Michigan State can clean up pretty easily here. And I think they get the job. I think they at least cover, and I think they could beat them as well. But I didn't want to pick against Indiana, and we should probably play this clip next week if I do end up switching my mind. An example of why you don't switch your mind at the last minute, but here we are. I switched. So going with the Spartans. Last but not least. Very quickly.
I had a fundamental rule when I would take tests in high school. I don't go back and look at the question again. And in college as well. I remembered just too many times, when you're in between it and then you flip it. I'd rather not flip it and get it. You know what I mean? That your gut, I feel, is like the gut is 51% and the flip is 49. I really feel that way. And so trust it, Andrew. I'm with you.
Know what I would do is I would fill out the questions I thought I would know. Well, if I was going through a test and there was a question, like you said, the gut feeling came up, but you just really didn't know, I would leave it blank instead of filling it out or going back to it, because then I wouldn't feel like I was going against my gut, and I could circle back and maybe have a fresh mind later in the test. I don't know. Is that kind of what I did in this one? But I think I never actually put down Indiana, so I don't think I went back in my answer. So I'll give myself some credit on that one.
I don't remember what I did because I'm too old.
Yeah, Ryder, you're a little bit older than us. So makes sense.
They didn't even have Scantrons.
Yeah, no, I did. We did have Scantrons, and I used to screw those up all the time. I would miss it. I would fill in the bubble for 14 or 15 when it should have been 14. Yeah, and I would totally. And I would be like, I get a 30 on the test. I'd be like, what happened? And then it's I filled out the Scantron wrong, and so yeah, I would make careless mistakes like that all the time on stuff like that, and would just watch everything. It was the most heartbreaking thing, but I just I couldn't get past that. It was a common problem throughout my testing, high school. It honestly gives me bad memories thinking about that. Now, I was awesome at Blue Book tests. Blue Book tests were awesome in college because because I could write, and nobody, and that's the thing. The secret is a lot of people, I hate to say this, can't write. So if you can put together a complete sentence, you're ahead of 90% of the college population.
Very true. Very true. My last test note, my good friend is from England, and he moved here in 6th grade. And one of the first tests he took, he filled out the entire Scantron with a blue pen and got a 0 on the test.
Oh, no.
And then thankfully, I think they let him retake the test. But anyways, all right. From test taking to the world's biggest outdoor cocktail party. World's biggest. Which one is it, Tony? Georgia versus Florida. Is it biggest?
Yeah, I thought it's biggest. Largest, I thought.
Largest outdoor cocktail party. Either way, there's going to be a lot of drinks had this weekend in Jacksonville as Georgia and Florida face off. The Gators are, not the Urban Meyer Gators of old. Still struggling quite a bit here. 16.5-point underdogs against Georgia on a neutral site. Tony finishes off here. Who do you got?
Yes, I Googled it. It is the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, and I am surprising myself. I was stupid when against Georgia when they went to Austin. I'm like, that was dumb. Like, I'm not going to do that again. Wrong. I am dumb, and I will do it again. I think I like Florida here. I think this is another. You got to pick your spots, and Florida is about to go. I mean, listen to their final November stretch: Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, then Florida State. And they're bad, but that's still a rival to end it. I mean, that's just an insane gauntlet to end. And this is the front end of it. If there's anything, if you're going to get up for anything, this is the one. 16.5. I mean, that's a few points, quite a few for a neutral site, maybe a late cover. I mean, they looked better. They just beat Kentucky, who looks dreadful this year, by a couple touchdowns. I mean, I don't know. Georgia, they're just coming off a big win, big emotional win. Let down. They win by 14, 15? So, Gators.
Yeah, I'm going with Georgia. Georgia's getting better over the course of the season, and that was reflective, obviously, in their last result against Texas. Florida's actually gotten better, too. I mean, they played Tennessee very close and then absolutely whipped Kentucky. The move to DJ Lagway, I think, was obviously benefited them. I mean, he's seen as the future of the program. And, there was a article I was reading recently that, people think that maybe the things are finally starting to come together for Billy Napier, that, his long-term vision is coming into effect. But Georgia's one of those teams, again, they get up for their biggest games, and Kirby's pretty ruthless in the development of his program. I mean, they don't usually go backwards at all. And so it's just usually an upward climb for them over the course of the season. So I don't think he's going to show much mercy for Florida. I think they're going to be, clicking on all cylinders. They've also been off, I think, 2 weeks now. So, I mean, he had ample time to prepare for this game. So I'm going with Georgia in this one.
Echo a lot of what Reiner had to say here. I like Georgia off the bye. Georgia takes these big games seriously. Like, Kirby Smart is the new Nick Saban. He's not going to let you down and have his team come out flat. Florida, they're playing better. I mean, they're actually scoring too. I mean, they scored 48 on Kentucky, barely lost to Tennessee, but Tennessee is not as good as we thought they were. So it's really hard to tell exactly what Florida is. But, even Clemson, we think Clemson's kind of good now, and they got just, dog walked by Georgia, no pun intended. So I'm picking the Bulldogs, and the points don't really scare me because they kind of play a similar style to Oregon. Like we said for the Michigan game, they get up by 7, all of a sudden they get the ball back, they're up by 14, then they get a pick, they're up by 21, then everything's gone, and next thing you know, you're down by 35, and you didn't even realize what happened. That's the kind of thing that Georgia does now, Alabama used to do. They just have overpowering size, speed, strategy, and things can get out of hand quickly.
First quarter is big here for those of us.
And frankly, I'm always
decided to back the Gators.
Yeah, between the two former Saban assistants, I mean, like, Kirby is, quite a bit better than Billy Napier. That's just the reality of it.
Yeah, no, it is. Any given Saturday, though, right? All right. That'll do it for today's episode of Hail Yes. You can get it anywhere you get your podcasts or on Freep.com on the podcast tab. Also, go to Freep.com for all of our continued coverage on the Michigan Wolverines. Basketball season is starting soon as well, next Monday. The next time you hear from us, hoop season will have started. The Wolverines open the year against Cleveland State. And when I tell you, the vibes could not be more different from one year to the next, I mean it. I'm pretty high on this Michigan basketball team. We're going to have to work them in here, boys. Get a little preview going and that sort of thing. It's just, this is always the time where things sort of speed up on you. We're trying to slow it down, and we thank all of you for being with us along the way. And thanks always as well to our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, to our sports editor, Bill Bradley, we are excited to have on board, our audio engineer, Robin Chan, and of course the fellas, Andrew and Reiner. For them, I'm Tony. Thanks for listening. This is Hell Yes.